Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today on this webinar. Happy Friday. My name is Chimburi Sam, for those that don't know me. I'm a senior solutions architect here at Aikens IT, and I've been here for about 4 years now. My main area of expertise is really on the network infrastructure side of things, so that covers your usual routing, switching, wireless, as well as security appliances, and of course the public cloud on the network infrastructure side of things as well. Um, again, for today's webinar, the main topic is, deploying a NG firewall solution into your environment, whether that be a brand new Azure infrastructure that you just recently built out or an existing one. During today's webinar, I'm going to be approaching it from a fresh perspective. So we're going to be building out the actual network infrastructure, deploying VMs, Windows VMs, including the NG Firewall security appliance that would secure that entire environment. Okay, so with that said here, we're gonna jump right in. So again, the title of our webinar today is Securing Your Azure Virtual Network with a NG Firewall Appliance. Okay, and NG Firewall just means that the firewall is able to do layer 7 filtering and has layer 7 visibility. So your application layer, right? So this gives you way more firepower and visibility into the type of traffic that's flowing in and out of your network, as well as what you can do with it, right? Your usual content filtering, web application, and so on. Okay, so here's going to be the topics we're covering today. So this webinar is going to be broken into 4 parts. The first being setting up a basic Azure network. Okay, so this again is going to be provisioning the actual virtual network, address spaces, carving out the subnets. And it's okay if you're not familiar with the Azure environment, that's completely fine. There are going to be some technical aspects of this webinar, but I'm going to do my best to keep it as high level as possible. And whether you recognize these processes or not, no worries. The main goal here is to show you how the NG firewall can be implemented in that environment to secure VMs within the Azure network, okay? So part 2 will be provisioning actual Azure Windows VMs. This is kind of to simulate a situation where you're having a hybrid setup, right? So you have your typical on-prem, or you have an actual physical data center, and you want to move not a full lift and shift, but just moving some of your infrastructure, slowly migrating it into the public cloud or Azure in this case. So usually in that situation, you would deploy, domain controllers and DNS servers just to start off, right? So that's just to show you what that process will look like. Again, very high level. Part 3 would be deploying the actual NG Firewall virtual appliance, okay, and what that process looks like. And then last but not least, part 4 would actually involve how traffic routes from the Azure network into the virtual appliance, security virtual appliance, as well as some basic firewall policies to get that traffic flowing, and of course security profiles, right, which involves your AV, content filtering, and IPS of the sorts. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move into our first part. So part 1, setting up a basic Azure network. Okay. This is really going to cover, selecting your location, whether that be West US, Central US, because again, there are multiple regions available to you, different data centers, right? Touching on resource groups, these are logical containers for your Azure objects to actually live in, and helps you to organize that. Virtual networks, address spaces, subnets, this is all a part of the network within Azure, and it will look very similar to your typical on-prem. The difference is that, we're not going to be dealing with things like VLANs, right? Um, and then last here would be network security groups. So I'm mainly going to touch on this just to show what that process looks like. And typically in a deployment where you are not using a NG firewall appliance to secure the environment, you're leaning completely on these network security groups to secure your network. And I just mainly want to show you because, as your network scales up and you need more and more security policies put in place, the NSG can really blow out of proportion and really get to a level of complexity that it makes it really difficult to troubleshoot, right? And that's where the NG firewall comes into play to make that process more seamless. All right. So jumping into the actual session here, first thing I'm going to do is actually sign into our Azure tenant. And you may or may not already have your own setup. That's fine. For those of you that do have an Azure tenant and have access, this should look pretty familiar to you. Okay. So once I get into the account here, first thing I'll do is set up my actual virtual network. That's located on the left-hand side here. Once I click on that, you're going to see, other virtual networks that we are currently using here at Akins. But what I'm going to do is deploy a brand new virtual network for this demo, okay? So I just click Add. And, I can name it whatever I want. So in this case here, I'm just going to call it like demo_vnet, right, for my virtual network. The address space, that should be something within the range or outside of the range of your on-prem or your existing networks, because you don't want that to overlap, okay? So in this case here, I'm going to set mine to, let's say, 10.100.0.0/16. So that's way out of our range. Next, here's the actual resource group. So again, it's just a logical container. So I'm going to create a new one. Just going to call it like demo resource group. Should be easy enough. Then, of course, my location. So here you have several to choose from. I'm going to choose Central US. And for my first subnet, I'm going to call it my outside transport, right? That might sound like a lot, but really all it's doing is it's going to assign this first subnet to the outside or the WAN interface on my virtual NG firewall, okay? So again, this is all carved out of that address space that I specified up top. So it's always going to be 10.100, 10, 10.120, 10.100, so on and so on and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. I'll just give it a couple of seconds here to actually deploy. And this is all deploying into my resource group, okay? So later on, I can reference that resource group and see everything that I deployed right in that container. So here, by refresh, I will now have my demo VNet. And you can see there my resource group. If I drill into that, from here, you can see up top my actual address space. And then from this point, I can actually start carving out those smaller subnets, right, to segment, so to speak, my virtual network. Gateway subnet, we're not going to use that. That's mainly used for what's called a virtual network gateway. It's Azure's VPN offering, but we're not using that here since we're going to use the NG firewall for that, okay? So my next subnet will be my inside. So this is much like your LAN segment, right? The LAN interface of or the inside interface of your on-prem firewall. I'm not going to use any network security groups. Routing table right now, we'll leave that empty because I'm actually going to use that later in the next segments. So I'm going to go and hit OK. We'll give that a couple of seconds to deploy here. Now you'll see my second subnet, and then I'm just going to deploy two more, right? So I'm going to create one for, let's say, server subnet A, and then I'm also going to have one for server subnet B. So this is kind of to simulate my different subnets on my network, right? So on your on-prem, these would be like different VLANs, okay? So I can essentially use server subnet A, let's say for my domain controllers in Azure, and internal resources. And then I can use, for example, like server subnet B, and this could be much like a DMZ on your on-prem. So again, I'll leave everything as is, hit OK. And in a couple of seconds here, I'll have my fourth subnet. So there we are. And so I created these, I made them large enough. You can carve out whatever size subnet you want. I mean, given the fact that we have so much available in the address space is a /16, that's over 65,000 different addresses I can make. So I can carve out smaller ones. So here I have all of my 4 subnets, and you'll notice on the right-hand side there, there's a column for security group, right? So this is where you would reference your NSG. So quickly, I'm going to deploy a network security group. This is just an object that you can get from the marketplace. I'll create that. I'm just going to give it some name. As far as the resource group, I'm going to throw it into the same resource group container I made earlier. Same location. I'll go ahead and create that. Okay, and once that deploys, we'll drill into it, and I'll show you a couple of ways to get to it. So there we are. You can see my NSG right there in the front, actually. But if I want to, I can search up top. You could do this for really any other object that you create as well. And you can see here, this is just kind of the default configuration for the network security group that I just created. I can also access it by going into the actual resource group, my demo resource group, and everything will appear in there as well. So right now I only have 2 objects, right? My VNet, virtual network, and my NSG. So here in the NSG, this is pretty similar to most firewall rules, right? Very, very basic, actually. It's just going to cover things like your source IP, your source port, destination IP, destination port. Once I add an actual rule here, I'm adding an inbound rule, and you can see it's just referencing source, destination, ports. There's nothing in there about applications, right? So you can't specify, Netflix traffic or Hulu or anything else that you want to create more logic from your actual traffic flow. So in this case here, I'm kind of restricted to just your basic firewall options, right? So allow, deny, and I can set the priority. And much just like a firewall, the way it flows, it's from top to bottom, okay? So your outbound security rules, they're going to look the exact same way. So I mean, you could just imagine, right? Here I would actually associate it with, this is how you apply to the actual VNet and subnet. So I mean, overall, you can see over time, if you have all these VMs that need different accesses coming in, going out, it can get pretty convoluted and overly complex. And again, especially when it comes to troubleshooting, that could be problematic, right? So here you can see I've applied the NSG to the actual VNet and subnet, okay? If I want to, I can apply it directly to the network interface of a VM. In this case here, I don't have any spun up yet, so there really isn't any available. Okay, so going back here, you can see the demo NSG being applied to the actual subnet there. Again, it's not doing anything. I don't have any policies in place, but that just kind of just to show you what that process looks like, okay? So there we are. So just to recap here for part 1, I selected my location, right? So central US, I've deployed my resource groups, my virtual network, carved out of that address space, that 10.100 address space, plus 4 subnets, and then of course touching on the actual network security group, okay? So moving on to the second part. So part 2, provisioning an Azure Windows VM. Okay, so again, this is really just to simulate what that will look like. usually when you're deploying your first set of VMs, you're likely going to be extending your server infrastructure into Azure, hybrid setup. So typically your first set of VMs are going to be, domain controllers, DNS servers, and so forth. Availability set, we're going to cover that as well. This is what Azure provides to give you that 99.9% SLA, right? So the way it works is when you deploy 2 or more VMs, you can actually set an availability set. So that way, let's say both of your domain controllers, you don't want both of those VMs existing in the same rack at a data center, right? Because if something happened with that rack, power failure or whatnot, you're losing both of your domain controllers, right? So an availability set guarantees that both of those domain controllers will be in different racks, okay? Not only that, but occasionally when Microsoft does their maintenance, which they have to do, they're only going to take down or upgrade or do maintenance on one rack at a time. So that ensures that you'll always have that redundancy in place. Next here is touching on the actual sizing, but again, very high level. I'm mainly just going to show what that looks like. Next is selecting which subnet your VMs will actually live on. And then quickly touching on public IPs, because in Azure, when you deploy a VM, Azure will automatically assign it a public IP because you're going to need to access it. But in our case, we're using an NG firewall. We do not need to assign a public IP directly to the VM, and I'll show you how to remove that. So jumping in here, I'm going to go ahead and jump right back into my Azure environment. And then from here, I'm going to want to go ahead and deploy a VM, right? So I'll go to virtual machines. And then on the upper left there, I'll click add. You're going to have a couple of options here. First things first, I'm just going to go ahead and select the VM or the image I want to spin up. So in this case, Windows Server. I'm going to select the same resource group. If you want to, you can create a new one if you want to organize it. I'm going to set the server or VM name, Survey VM01. As far as region, I'm going to keep it in Central US. And then this is where the availability option comes into play, right? So there's two options available. There's availability zones and set. Set is local to that data center, okay? That's what we're going to touch on in this video. So I'm going to set my availability set. I don't have one yet, so I'm going to create a new one. So here I can give it whatever name I want. And then you can see there, you can select your fault domains, right? So you can select up to 3. So if you have 3 VMs, they're going to be on 3 different fault domains. If you have 2 VMs, they're going to, be divided into 2. I have my upgrade domains as well. And again, that has to do with, Microsoft's maintenance, right? So I'll go and hit OK. I have my availability set, and I'm going to select my sizing. So here you're going to be selecting it based on your how many virtual CPUs, how much memory, the cost on the right-hand side. That's all just an estimate, right? For me, I'm going to pick 2 virtual CPUs and 4 gigs of memory, right, for my VM. I'm going to select that, and then go ahead and enter in my admin credentials. So these are the local admin credentials that Azure will spin the VM up with, okay? So you can get access into it. So I have that all in place. And then next here, I'm going to provision what type of disks, okay? So you have a couple options. I'm not going to really dig too deep into that, but for me, I'm going to select premium SSD. For the networking, I have my demo VNet. For the subnet, I'm going to select subnet 8, okay? And then there's my public IP. I'm going to go ahead and remove that because, again, I'm not going to use it. And then no network security groups. And then on the management plane, I'm going to just keep that all default. This is just for diagnostics and so forth that Azure can do for you in case there's an issue with a VM. And everything looks good, so I'm just going to go ahead and deploy this first VM. So we'll give it a couple of seconds here, and you can see there in upper right, it's deploying again into that resource group. And in this case here, it's actually going to create all of my objects. It's going to create my virtual NIC. It's going to create my virtual disks, and then send it all into that resource group, and later, once I'm done deploying, I'll show you the resource group and you'll see all the objects that were created. So here, I'm going to go ahead and show you the VM that I just deployed. And you can see the private IP that's been assigned to it. So it starts with .4 as the first dynamic assigned IP. And now I'm going to deploy a second VM. And mainly what I want to showcase here is, how do I add another VM to that same availability set, right? So let's say I'm deploying my second domain controller now to be a part of that set. So I'll call it server A, let's say VM02. I want to keep that in central US. And then here I can actually select my availability set. So now I have that option. So my demo_set is now available. Now, when I spin up this VM, it's going to exist in the same availability set and be ensured that it's going to be in different fault and upgrade domains. I'm not going to do that here. There's really no need for me in this demo. So I'm just going to provision server B, and I'm going to throw this guy onto my second subnet, my server subnet B, okay? Just going to use the same sizing, same local admin credentials as well. And get that entered there. Head over to disks, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to select premium networking. For my subnet, I'm going to select subnet B. I'm going to turn off the public IP and the network security group. Again, we're not using any of that. And then management, I'll just keep that default again. So now once it gets deployed, this VM will live on subnet B, and it's going to have, again, a dynamically assigned IP within that subnet as well, okay? And then now I kind of have that segmentation in place, right? And just like the previous VM, it's going to create all the network objects, NICs, virtual disks, and so on. And now you can see here I have both of my VMs. And if I drill into server B, you can see there the 10.120.4 address. And from here, if I drill into the actual resource group, you can now see all these additional objects that have been created, okay? So that's why, I mean, in your case, if you're doing your own deployment, you can put them into different resource groups. Here I can drill into the actual virtual NIC. I can see the IP address that was assigned. If I want to, I can actually go ahead and drill in further and actually statically assign. So, this is where you statically assign your IP addresses for your server. So you don't actually do that from within the VM, okay? I'm gonna back out here, go back into my resource group. And that concludes provisioning your VMs. So now I have my network infrastructure. I have my Azure VNet. I have my VMs in there. So I mean, I'm almost there, right? I have most of my infrastructure in place. So to recap here, again, I deployed 2 VMs, and again, they're typically domain controllers and DNS servers from the get-go for your first set of servers. I showed you how to deploy them in an availability set. I also showed you the sizing options that are available, selecting the actual VM's subnet once you deploy it, and then touch on the public IPs on the actual VMs and how to remove it. Okay. So part 3, deploying an NG Firewall virtual appliance. Okay, so now this whole topic is about, right? So in the Azure marketplace, there are several options available. There are other vendor offerings as well, right? So you have Cisco virtual appliance, you have PAN, you have Barracuda. That's all up there. For this demo, I'm going to utilize the FortiGate virtual appliance. I love working with that appliance, both a physical on-prem appliance or virtual. They're pretty much the same with their 40 operating system. But I mean, overall, it's a powerful firewall. It's a powerful product with a lot of cool features available, and at the same time, it has very easy to navigate GUI, and it's intuitive. And that's one of the best things that I love about it. Okay, so you have the power, but you also have the ease of management, right? Being able to look at logs and things like that. So for those of you that already have a FortiGate, I think you know what I'm talking about. But for those that don't, you'll see in a bit here. Once I deploy the FortiGate, you'll get a better understanding of the GUI. For the time that we have, I'm not going to go into all the features, of course, but you'll at least get a basic understanding of how that looks, okay? I'm going to be touching on the licensing model for the virtual appliance. So you can do pay-as-you-go or buy or bring on your own license. So also applying those outside and inside transport subnets that I had configured previously. You'll see how that comes into play now. And then, assigning a public IP to the actual firewall, and then, how to access it and manage it at that point, okay? So let's jump right in. So again, I have my virtual network and VMs, and now I want to deploy the actual NG firewall. So I'll go right back to the marketplace again. And then I'm going to type in FortiGate. I'm going to have a couple options here. I'll do the single VM. You can also deploy the FortiGate in a high availability option, but that's not going to be covered in this video. Here, I'm going to just go ahead and name the VM. And then now I can select between my licensing options, right? So I could do pay-as-you-go or bring your own license based on the FortiOS version that I want to choose, right? So for my demo here, I'm just going to utilize 6.06. 6.2.1 is much newer and it includes other features, but for our video here, I'll just go with what has been deployed in most environments, right? So I'll go ahead and set my administrative username and password. Here, I'm going to just create a new resource group just so I can have all my FortiGate objects just contained in a completely different container and will be easier for me to manage later on, right? If I want to delete it or whatnot. And then as far as locations, I'm going to, again, just select Central US. And now under the actual virtual network, I can specify a new one, or I can actually choose my previous one that I created, my demo VNet. Here I can select my sizing as well, because again, it's a VM. So there are different sizing options available based on your license that you purchase for it. Here I'm just going to do 1 virtual CPU and 2 gigs of memory. And then here I'll select my outside and inside transports, okay? So again, all it is just WAN interface and inside or LAN interface, okay? Going to hit OK. Here I can actually assign my public IP. And this is going to be the public address that gets assigned to the FortiGate virtual appliance itself. And then towards the end here, I'll show you that that's ultimately how I'm going to get in and manage the appliance as well. So just to kind of quickly recap on my settings, I have my location, my version, the virtual network that I'm deploying it to, my outside and inside subnets. Again, it's just WAN or LAN, right? I'll hit OK. And then I'll go ahead and create this VM. In a few seconds here, we'll have our full FortiGate virtual appliance deployed. Here we are. And I'll pop in here now, and you can see the actual VM, okay? And it's up and running with its own resource group there on the right-hand side. If I want to, I can drill right into that group and see all of the objects that were created in that template, in that deployment that I just did a while ago. All right, so if I drill into the actual FortiGate, here I'm going to see my public IP address that has been assigned to me from Azure, okay? So that public IP, you can just treat it as the same as that private IP below, because all it's doing is just NATing directly to that private IP, okay? So here I can open up my tab and actually jump right into the FortiGate appliance using HTTPS. And then I could just sign into it here with the same admin credentials that I had configured earlier. All right, there we are. So again, for those of you that have a FortiGate, this probably looks just like your FortiGate in your environment. For those that don't, this is the FortiGate GUI, okay? So here I can go under network and interfaces, and you'll see the two, my outside transport and inside transport, right? So port 1, that's my outside transport. And then port 2, I have my inside. So you could just treat this just like my WAN and LAN ports on, your on-prem firewall, right? So pretty similar concept there, just kind of approach it a little bit differently. And there we are. So to recap here, again, we went ahead and deployed a FortiGate virtual appliance, virtual machine from the Azure Marketplace. I went with a pay-as-you-go licensing model just because I'm demoing it, right? I mean, ideally, you want to bring your own license so that way it's more cost-effective for you overall. I went ahead and assigned those outside and inside subnets to the firewall. Again, it's just my WAN and LAN. Then I gave it a public IP address and management access, right? So right now I can manage the device through its public IP. Okay. So now to our last part. Part 4, routing, firewall policies, and security profiles. So here, I mean, we have our virtual FortiGate appliance, right? It's in the Azure environment, but no traffic is currently flowing through it. So my VMs right now pretty much don't know that the FortiGate exists, okay? So in order to route traffic from the VMs into the FortiGate and through the FortiGate, I need to set some routes, okay? In the Azure world, they're called user-defined routes, okay? Custom routes. Next, I'll be configuring the actual firewall policies just to allow traffic to flow, right? Just like any firewall policy, you gotta say that, okay, from this source to that destination, it's allowed. So that's all we're doing. I'm going to create one for my server out to the internet, as well as allowing subnet to subnet communication, because in this environment, let's say server subnet A is your internal resources, server subnet B is your DMZ. So, you want to restrict what type of communication, right? In our demo, I'm just going to allow complete communication, but, ideally you want to lock it down to only specific ports that are required, right? So next on that is actually enabling the NG firewall features. So things like antivirus, IPS for my outside to inside rule to my servers, denial of service policies, which the FortiGate has as well built into it. And of course, web and application filtering, right? And or just at least to have that visibility into what's flowing in and out of your environment. And then next is enabling full SSL inspection. So, which is also known as deep packet inspection, right? So just to kind of cover that a little more, I mean, you have to remember that nowadays roughly about 97 to 98% of all traffic, okay, leaving your network, coming into your network, they're all encrypted. So if that traffic is encrypted, you don't have visibility into what is in the data payload. You don't know what's in there. Okay, your firewall doesn't know what's in there. So in order to inspect that, your firewall needs to have the capability to decrypt that packet, look at it, inspect it, make sure there's, nothing malicious in there, or even just to ensure that your content filtering is applied properly, uh, and then re-encrypt it and then send it on its way. So the same applies when it's coming back from a web server or location into your environment. It'll decrypt it, look at the payload, and then re-encrypt it and send it to you. Okay, so that's just the gist of it, right? So here we go. We'll jump in. So here I have my FortiGate appliance, but I need to route traffic through it. Okay, so I'm just going to create a route in Azure, just called a route table. I'm going to do this for server A. Okay, so I'll apply it directly to its subnet. I'll just use the same resource group, same location, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit create. And this is no different than adding routes, okay? In your on-prem environment, it's just approached somewhat differently, okay? But same concept. So here I have my object. I'm going to go and add my route, and I'm going to say, to get to the internet, okay, use the FortiGate. So I'm selecting virtual appliance, and here you'll see my route, and my next hop, that's the inside interface on that virtual FortiGate. Okay, the transport subnet, that IP that's assigned to the LAN. And here I can assign it directly to my server A subnet. And now that route applies to the entire subnet. So any other VMs I spin up in that subnet will get that same routing, okay? So I've already done that for server subnet B, just to save some time. And then there you can see both of my routes. So now going back to my FortiGate, of course, you need the firewall policies. I've already created that. There's my server to internet. It's no different than like a LAN to internet, okay? And here's a really cool feature of the FortiGate. If you're using SSL VPN, okay, you can do it through just your web browser. So here I can sign in with my VPN credentials. And then through there, I can launch stuff like RDP, right? So instead of opening up RDP on my firewall, I can use SSL VPN through the web, enable RDP either into a workstation or let's say you have an RDS or terminal server environment. It's a really nice way to pop in. So here I'm on server A, and you can see I have internet access, okay? Now what I don't have is communication between server A and server B because they're on completely different subnets. So here I'm going to do a constant ping, and you're going to see that it's just going to fail. Okay, and so this is real easy. I'll just create a new policy. This is like a LAN to LAN policy. If you have multiple VLANs, it's no different. So I'll call it subnet to subnet. My incoming and outgoing interface is just the inside interface. And then my source and destination address is just, I'm just going to set it to all. So that's going to cover all of the servers. And then, of course, all services. If I wanted to lock it down to just RDP, I could do that too. And then, if this is a DMZ environment, I can enable AV between those two subnets, just so I'm filtering that traffic. So there we are. Go back to my VM. You can see now I'm able to communicate with server B. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Okay, so next here, you notice I'm accessing the FortiGate still through its public IP. You definitely want to close that off, right? So I'm going to open up management to my internal interface instead. Okay, so I'm going to enable HTTP, HTTPS, and then I'm going to turn it off on my WAN in that order. Okay, because if you turn it off on your WAN initially, you're going to lock yourself out. I can apply botnet site detection, which is a great option that FortiGates provide, along with your regular antivirus subscription. Okay. So here I'm just gonna show you that I'm now accessing the FortiGate through the inside interface because I can no longer access it through the public, which is what you want. And there we go. So now I'm accessing the FortiGate through server A, okay? Next here, I want to apply some default, security profiles, right? AV, web filter, DNS, and I'll drill into a couple of them here just so you can see some options. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but if you have any other questions or want more of a demo, I can definitely set that up separately. So DNS, we're doing botnet filtering. For web filtering, I'm just blocking, just security risk categories, right? I'm going to just allow traffic to be logged. This is great. So if I need to investigate anything, I can. It's all being logged. Here I have my outside to inside rule, right? Like destination NAT. So if I have access coming out from the outside to a server internally, I want to enable AV, of course, IPS. There are a couple default options available, pre-made ones. So if I have an HTTP server, I could just choose that because I only need to filter HTTP related vulnerabilities, right? In this case here, I'm just going to select default and then just allow logging, okay? So there we are. So I have those policies in place. Also for my outside to inside server, right? If someone's connecting to my server internally from the outside, what if they're doing like a denial of service attack or scanning your public IPs for vulnerable or open ports? So the FortiGate also provides denial of service policies and protection. So I can configure it here to pretty much detect and block port scanning or somebody doing a TCP flood against one of my web servers. So I can do that based on a lot of different options available here. Again, you can really get into it, and there's a lot of options available. I'm just kind of quickly skim over it, but mainly just to show you that it's available. Okay, and this is a part of the UTM licensing. So there we are. We have our denial of service policy. So going back here, SSL inspection, right? So right now I'm not doing deep packet inspection. It's just certificate level inspection, okay? It's not decrypting and re-encrypting anything. So here I can go ahead and go to my deep inspection profile. I can exempt sites like finance and banking if I want to, if there's any sites sensitive to inspection. And then all I need to do is just download the certificate straight from the FortiGate. It's right there. And then with that certificate, just install it on any endpoint that's going to be subjected to having its traffic inspected. Okay. So here, just quickly, I'm going to install the cert. I'm going to add it to my trusted root certificate authority store. And there we are. So now I have that cert from the FortiGate applied on my VM. Okay, and I'm going to subject the VM to deep packet inspection. So here I can just drill into my policy and just enable deep inspection. And that's it. So now what I'll do is I'm going to just open another tab in incognito, just so we have a fresh session. I'm going to go to Fortinet, and you'll see here in the certificate validation, it's valid, it's secure, and you're going to see it's issued by the FortiGate. So that tells me that my packet, my SSL traffic is being inspected. It's visible to the FortiGate. Okay. And again, this is huge to have your firewall have that visibility. So your content filtering is accurate, it's precise. Here I can drill in directly into the policy and look at my traffic logs. So there's my server A. I can see my destinations or what applications are currently being used, websites, web categories. So I mean, there's a lot, right? And last but not least here, you want to tie in this FortiGate and this Azure environment back to your on-prem for that hybrid setup. So if you have two FortiGates, you can easily use the wizard, and I mean, literally in a couple of clicks, you have your IPsec VPN tunnel built out, okay? If you don't have two FortiGates, that's fine. It uses IPsec, that's the standard, and you can easily build out that tunnel as well, okay? So hopefully that wasn't too much, too quickly. There's only so much I can try to squeeze in this time that we have, but I hope that was, overall informative for you. But again, just to recap what was covered. So in part 4, we looked at, routing traffic from your Azure environment into the NG firewall, in this case, the FortiGate. We have the firewall policy configured for inside to outside, outside to inside, as well as subnet to subnet communication, what that looks like. Enabled a couple of NG firewall features right off the bat. Again, things like botnet, IP detection, that's huge. Botnet command and control, DNS, IPS, denial of service. I mean, there's a lot, right? Enabling full SSL or deep packet inspection. There's also other parts of the security fabric that FortiGate offers as well, right? You have FortiClient EMS, where it provides endpoint protection, as well as if you have company issued laptops or whatnot, and you want to enforce web and application filtering, even when they're off net, that's what FortiClient EMS can do. There's the FortiAnalyzer, which is just this, really robust logging and reporting platform that Fortinet provides that integrates with the FortiGate to give you, log retention of a year or more. You can hold the logs for as long as you need. So if you need to archive and pull any logs, for any issues that arise, later on down the road, you have those logs available to you. So yeah, that covers that. So I want to switch over now to opening up to some questions here. All right, so there's that. Here's my face again. I'm just gonna quickly browse through the questions that are currently listed here, and I'll do my best to answer it out for you, okay? So give me a second here. Okay, so here's one question here, and this is probably more of a question that's geared towards our system solution architects, but I mean, ultimately you can have, so you have your AD domain services in Azure, but it's still a good idea to have the actual domain controller VMs operating in there as well, okay? So that way you can extend your AD domain and manage it like, how you would normally manage your on-prem DCs, okay? Again, that's a little bit out of my area, but if, you definitely, if you want more information on that, we can easily engage some of our other engineers to help answer that question for you, okay? And give you a little more detail on that, all right? And then another question here. I probably would have helped if I read the first question there, but it's published if you guys want to actually see that in the Q&A options. So the second question here is, are the site-to-site VPN settings as easy to configure on the NG firewall as they are between two sites? Yes. So again, if you have, two FortiGates, if you already have a FortiGate on-prem and you have, you deployed an NG firewall virtual appliance, another FortiGate, I mean, you can easily use that same wizard option to, in a matter of clicks, build that site-to-site tunnel between your Azure environment onto your on-prem, okay? Again, if you don't have two FortiGates, let's say you have another solution on-prem, Sonic Wall, PAN, whatnot, but, you have a FortiGate virtual appliance, that's totally fine too. It's going to take a couple more steps and configuration, to get that going. But, ultimately it's using the, IPsec standard option, right? So from there, you're really just building out all your phases and connecting it to your on-prem. So, but again, if you have two FortiGates, it really simplifies that process. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and publish that there. So really, if there's, I'll give it a couple more seconds here just in case there are any other questions coming through. I know this video is a little delayed, so I want to make sure if anyone has any questions. But even then, if you don't have any questions now, if you need me to elaborate more or touch on certain concepts covered in this video that we just didn't have time to, or I was moving too fast, let me just kind of throw this up here. So here's, our contact. There's my contact down at the bottom, along with my face, in case you've forgotten what I look like. Yeah, so if you have any other questions or, more stuff on the server side that I didn't touch on, or key aspects of, the FortiGate deployment or features that you want me to elaborate on, or you want more information on, please feel free to reach out to us, right? I mean, we cover pretty much anything related to infrastructure and to security. So, server side of things, storage, security appliances, again, routing, switching, wireless, we really do it all, okay? And we have experts in all areas that can assist. So I'm going to leave that up for a little bit here, and looks like I have all the questions for now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and wrap this up. And again, I just want to thank everyone that participated today and joined in on the webinar. Again, I hope it was informative for you. Hopefully it wasn't too technical and it was just the right touch. But again, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all, okay? Or you just want, a demo session directly, okay? All right, again, happy Friday, guys, and thanks for joining.